Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the FPL script. This is season 2, episode 16, the Gameweek 13 preview for the 23-24 FPL season. I'm your co-host, Fran, or FPL Fran. You'll find me on X as FPL__Fran. And I'm, of course, with my co-host once again, Schadenfreudist, one replacing the I in Schadenfreudist on social media platforms. Today, we're going to talk about Game Week 13. If you wanted to hear our thoughts in terms of our team reviews in Game Week 12, we did actually have a specific sort of international break episode, otherwise known as break Time 2. So you can have a look at that in terms of our past live streams on YouTube, and I'm pretty sure the audio recording would also have been uploaded on platforms over the break. Otherwise, let's just get stuck into Game Week 13. And I think just to sort of reset the meta, we have JD here with a wildcard template that sort of sets the scene for some of the talking points for this episode.
Yeah, thanks, Fran. So I'm just going to read out the team for anyone listening on podcast. So the goalkeepers for first of all, just a bit of background. So I ran the wildcard 13 solve on FPL review using 50% market odds and 50% massive data. And this is the team that I got from that with my budget. So I think I have a team value of 102.6 or something. But again, it depends on selling value and the players you retain. So not exactly 102.6. So the goalkeepers are Flecken and Areola. The defenders are Saliba, Gabriel, Taylor, Colwill, Castagne. Midfield is Salah, Son, Saka, Eze, Mbeumo. And the forwards are Holland, Alvarez, and Archer. And against my team, it's showing an expected gain of around 22 expected points. So, first thoughts. What do you think about this?
What's interesting, I think, is just to start off with the sort of defensive positions. I think Fleck and Areola is probably going to be meta very, very shortly for some managers, just because we're also holding so many free transfers. And the way I see it, a lot of us are keeping our team structures relatively in place. So we do have room for that sort of keeper transfer. So I do think Flecken will sort of be within our team soon. But then the name that I think is probably a little bit more debatable, along with Castagne, is going to be Colwill, right? Because I think when we look at Colwill, first question I would probably ask is he really nailed? Because I've seen a lot of Chelsea sort of predictors think that Colwill is absolutely nailed. And of course, he started the season off strong. He pretty much assumed that left back spot very quickly. And if anything, he's pretty much taken Chilwell's minutes away. Chilwell, of course, is now touring around America, enjoying his time off, obviously due to injury. And Colwill, the only blemish really on his record has been that 45-minute substitution versus Spurs in a very, very specific game state. But also a little bit concerning, I think, in the light of Cucurella playing quite well at times. And actually, he's been playing right back and left back too. So what do you think about Colwill's minutes, first of all? Do you think they're secure?
No, I completely agree with you. There is a little, not more than a little bit of doubt when it comes to his minutes now. I think, especially because he got hooked at halftime against Spurs. So I think that is not lending itself to certainty when it comes to his xMins. I still think that all things considered, if he's fully fit, I still think he's like the first choice for left back. But I don't think that he's as nailed as, let's say, someone like Silva, because just out of interest, I was looking at Dizazi to see if he is nailed, and he missed out on a couple of games in the past month. So even he's not nailed. So it's either Thiago Silva, and I've seen a lot of people saying that because of his age, you would expect him to sit out a game over this busy period. I don't know if that's going to happen. By the way, I think he's fantastic for a player for his age, and his fitness is incredible. So he might not end up missing a game because he's playing centre back after all. But even if he does, I don't know how things are going to fall in terms of their defense. So what are you putting his minutes now at in let's say, for example, solving review?
I'm letting it stay at default. I believe the default's 80, but obviously that just assumes starts all the time. And of course, I think there is already an availability sort of decay on game week 13. So, but of course, the assumption, of course, with a wildcard draft like this is Colwell serves you for the good Chelsea games, right? So, I think I'm of the mind that he's still first choice, but I agree with you. There's a little bit of doubt, and he might miss out on a game or two. And it just really depends on also how he continues to play fixtures out, because you can either play yourself to retain that spot, or I think if there are more performances, for example, like the Spurs one, where you're getting easily rattled. You're
Mm.
trying to, for example, throw away your chances at an easy victory on paper, right? Versus 10 Spurs players. In that context, I think people are almost overstating how important he is to the team. If you can be taken off at 40, it's not the first time someone's gotten a yellow card before 45 minutes. And,
Yeah.
to be hooked off at halftime says that there's enough depth in your squad, in my opinion, that you can be rotated. So, yeah, I think there's a slight concern with Colwill, and if anything, if you're not wildcarding anytime soon, I think the easiest thing with Colwill is just take a wait and see sort of approach. I've been owning Colwill this whole time because, as I said, when planning ahead from Game Week 8, I knew I didn't need a transfer necessarily, and it's nice to see, of course, a player like Taylor in this draft, because it also kind of tells you, in theory, right, if Colwill gets to play all these fixtures, and of course Castagna plugs in the gaps for Game Week 18, right, and even, let's say, 13 potentially, you can actually probably survive with 4 defenders, and that's an interesting sort of thing to think about, right, when you're thinking about the meta of your teams. A lot of us have been thinking about, whether we go into Lascelles, whether we don't go into Lascelles, but actually, if a wild card is showing Taylor, maybe you don't actually need to have, for example, 5 defenders over this fixture run.
Yeah, and also one thing to note is that I've used default xMins on review solve. So someone like Lascelles will never pop on these solves because his xMins are not good.
Exactly.
And it completely depends on if you think that Botman is going to come back or not. If you think he's going to come back soon, you will obviously set Lascelles 6 minutes to decay pretty rapidly, and that would mean that he will never show up on any of the solves. Otherwise, he will show up, and that's an entirely I think subjective call when it comes to something like that. So that spot, as you said, is probably, you can probably take some risks if you don't want Charlie Taylor, but essentially, as Fran said, we are playing with 4 defenders in that case, and assuming that Colwill takes his left back spot. Also, the double Arsenal defense is entirely in line with what we've been expecting or what we have seen for the past couple of weeks, which is that you either go with Raya, Saliba, Raya, Gabriel, or Gabriel and Saliba. And review has been pushing Saliba, like for me to get Saliba every single week since I've wildcarded in Game Week 10. This week is no different. The default suggestion on review is to do cash to Saliba and roll the other transfer. But it just seems wholly unexciting for me, so I'm probably going to veer elsewhere.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, I've got some transfer strategies where, let's say, if I have Palmer's minutes, at an acceptable level, because I do think reviews defaults for Palmer are a little bit too low still.
Yeah,
Even if
yeah.
Nkunku's to come in, those are just my thoughts. But yeah, I think Saliba is just viable really to serve a role for 3 weeks, right? Because the way I see it is, around Game Week 16, when Arsenal's fixtures turn again, you just simply hop off of Saliba, and at that sort of price point, you've got access to both Walker and Reece James, and so those are your, I think, prime target options. Maybe even Porro potentially. We'll see obviously how we feel about Spurs' defense by then, but those are sort of the picks that will come up and be rather interesting as transfers out of Saliba if you, let's say, invest into double Arsenal defense. So I think the question really is just, if you're dealing with such situations, yeah, are there any other moves, for example, like yourself, where I presume you've got a midfield move of choice that you can make as opposed to that? Or, I mean, yeah, it makes plenty of sense to go double Arsenal defense for the short term, just because the way the fixtures are, like, there really aren't any teams that actually have good fixtures until, let's say, Game Week 16, outside of maybe Crystal Palace, but even our expectations of Crystal Palace aren't particularly high. So I myself am probably not looking to go Saliba, just because I actually like the idea of using one free transfer this week and then rolling that with more information. So that's why I'm sort of in the camp where I'd rather not go Saliba for now, because for me, for Saliba to be actually helpful for my team, I'd probably need to make a second transfer as well, just because I'm unfortunately tight in cash, and yeah, that's my situation. But I do think double Arsenal defense is the way to go, really. It's just a question of maybe whether you want to spend those 2 free transfers to get there, if that's what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And we can actually move on to this part of the conversation that we were having, which is basically other set of moves, which is getting in a midfielder. So before we move on to one of the topics that we've decided for the pod, which is talking about Bowen and in general how models read Bowen, I quickly want to talk about, let's say, delaying the move for Mbeumo, because Mbeumo's fixtures from Game Week 14 are pretty good until the time he leaves for AFCON. So delaying his move means that getting someone like Eze or Brennan Johnson, because those are the 2 moves that the review has suggested me based on certain solver settings that I have. So first of all, what do you think out of those two? Do you have a particular preference?
Yeah, you know what? I think my preference is still Eze, because of minutes, and then second of all, just because it seems like he's more backed by both review and market.
Hmm.
I know why you've gotten Johnson because this is a 50-50 solve, right? So, and also you do run your own solves with slightly higher market odds, and I think Johnson's EV on market is a lot better. So
Hmm.
so I like the idea. Just going back to some previous sentiments that we've expressed, where if someone is review backed as well, and he's also backed elsewhere, makes sense to actually go for that option. Whereas obviously, if it's either or, that sort of throws things up for more debate. For me, since Johnson is sort of more heavily backed by market, less backed by review, and then you've got Eze, who's actually backed by both. In reality, I like the idea of going for Eze, and as I said, going back to the minutes, I would still say that right now, even though we know Richarlison's out for surgery, and his turnaround time is actually very short because I believe Ange effectively said that his turnaround time is 1 month. So obviously,
Hmm.
with the international break, Richarlison's back quite soon. So actually, if you think about it too, I mean, how long is that Johnson transfer going to last you? Because his sort of immediate two fixtures are Aston Villa and City, his toughest fixtures, and then maybe around then you've got Richarlison almost close to coming back potentially,
Hmm.
and not to mention too that Johnson, anyways, as it stands, is probably one of the players who's going to be an early sub, right? We saw that in the previous match as well versus Wolves, where he was an
Exactly.
early
Yeah.
sub, even after scoring as well. So it doesn't really have any impact. He clearly isn't, for example, like first choice for Ange by any reason other than the fact that he's the only one who actually can be first choice. So that's why I don't like Johnson that much. Whereas with Eze, as long as he's fit, we've seen that he's a 90-minute player just constantly for Roy Hodgson. So I would much rather go Eze.
I'm with you there. I'm thinking about most likely my transfer is going to be Diaby to Eze,
Mm-hmm.
and as you already stated, if so, let's say a player is backed only by market odds, like for example Gordon or Adingra, we still want to go for those, but if a player is backed by both market and review, I would
Yeah.
much rather go for that player. And also penalties is also a big factor,
Mm-hmm.
because there was some speculation. Apparently, I didn't put any weight into that, but there was some speculation that because there had been only one penalty that Eze had taken. When Zaha was absent and both him and Orson Edward were on the pitch, there was some speculation as to who would take them, but obviously it's still Eze. Now you could say that he won the penalty, so maybe someone still wants to doubt it, but I absolutely don't doubt it. So I think the review expected value also shows that I think the penalty weightage is firmly in Aze's favor.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's move on to that topic that you were talking about previously, which was going to be, how do models rate Bowen? I think the question is more centered around review, if we're honest, because it seems like I would say most other models do seem to respect Bowen a little bit more, whereas
Hmm.
Bowen, as you can probably tell on review, isn't particularly backed as an option. I have seen him, for example, as a transfer choice around AFCON, just because of course you're taking effectively three of the best mids in the game on value, and you're removing them for 3 to 4 weeks, and that's why I've seen Bowen as a transfer option down the line. But it's still very clear the case that in the short term at least, review doesn't really like Bowen and hasn't liked Bowen, right, for some of the already very good fixtures that West Ham have played. So what are your thoughts on that? And actually, just as a little bit of a thought experiment as well, I also ran Kudus with slightly beefed up minutes,
Hmm.
upwards of 90 to be honest, and still couldn't really see that he was anywhere near, for example, let's say other leading picks like Azera and Mbeumo. So what are your thoughts on that generally?
So I think we talked about Kudus on the live stream that
Yeah.
we did last week, and because I've already modeled his expected value for an international tournament. Again, it's a different thing because there is less competition if you're like the main man, as compared to club where there is rotation and other things to consider when looking at xMins. But in general, I think that even if Kudus's minutes are low, it could also be because I don't know, like there is some weightage being assigned to integration within the club or being introduced to the league and stuff like that. Because I think as soon as we have enough of a sample size, I think his baselines have to revert or have to get close to what his baselines were in Ajax when he was at Ajax. So that is one speculation. I of course don't exactly know the inner workings of review, but I can speculate as much to that effect. And I think with Bowen, it's clearly dividing even analytics FC itself, because there are a lot of players who are firmly in the camp, where Mikel and other algorithms are firmly recommending Bowen to you, and they are going for him. And I do see merit in that, because he is playing 90 minutes every single game. He is. I don't, the penalty thing is obviously, we haven't. Have we seen James Ward-Prowse take one? We haven't, right?
No, but I think there's no way Bowen will take penalties.
Yeah, exactly.
In the
But
short term.
even
Yeah.
if that's like the one big thing that we have against maybe getting Bowen right now, which
Yeah.
is the fact that he's not on penalty and we on penalties, and we have so many other midfielders who are on penalties. That's probably like a big thing against Bowen. But I believe you were the one who commented on former Delo's post saying that there's nothing to scoff at, we also said that on the stream, that there's nothing to no need to write him off exactly. But I do understand the apprehension that people have. On the other hand, him playing striker could also be a past indication where it hasn't worked out as well. So maybe the baselines from that are not helping this stint out, but it could be completely different, as I've said earlier on the stream as well, that the surrounding teammates are different. I believe that is a big factor when it comes to someone playing in an out of position role. So I do think that Bowen is a very legitimate buy, but I also think that, for example, if I look at my midfield, or if I look at, let's say, the wildcard 13 midfield that we talked about earlier, I don't see how I fit Bowen in here except for Saka. And we keep coming back to that. I think Saka is probably the only one right now where you can actually contest that he is more expensive and his propensity for giving away penalties is not helping his cause right now. So if anyone can be sacrificed out of this midfield, I would say Saka. But otherwise, I would not sacrifice any of them for Bowen. I don't know what you feel about that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Although I think also the community point of view is that they're generally quite down on a player like Son as well, and particularly Spurs, as a team over this run. So he's also one of the players that have been suggested. But as we do tend to love penalties, and look, ultimately Son, his XG is probably still going to remain relatively strong and healthy, and we know he overperforms. That's the biggest thing. Whereas I think with Bowen, this is one of his sort of big upticks in XG, right? So yeah, it might be a case where we're adjusting, but I feel like it also reminds me of the Trippier situation, where a lot of people were adjusting to Newcastle's good fixtures, but too late, and suddenly Trippier's 7.0, and then people have the narrative that he's essential when the fixtures really have sort of come and gone. And with Bowen's case, I suppose you've got 2 fixtures left now, and then maybe it gets slightly worse until around that time, once again, as I mentioned, with AFCON, where he's going to be a more than viable pick, and in fact, we probably have to transfer him in just due to lack of options. So that's where I sit right now, because I think now that Bowen is 7.7, which is a pretty ridiculous price, I do think he feels to me as if it would be a suboptimal transfer for me to go there, because that's so much of an expensive money when I just have Eze sitting there right for me for basically 1.6 million less. And I think that's part of the argument about Bowen. It sort of reminds me at the early season topics when we were talking about players like Mbeumo and March and things like that. For me, Bowen, I suppose it's one of those cases where he has actually, provided good historic returns for us. I think a lot of people do subscribe to other models and have gone into Bowen anyways. But like we've mentioned in previous episodes, as long as you have other options around, you can always skirt past someone that isn't necessarily review-backed by going with the reboot-backed option. Although we say that as two players who have deliberately sidestepped Mbeumo to go Diaby. So... we will take the L on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, just to round off that discussion, when it comes to Mitoma, it actually has paid off.
Yeah.
Because if you subscribe to the idea that you feel like review is unfairly treating Mitoma, and if you had gone for someone else, let's say Mbeumo, someone close to his price range, you have benefited massively, because I think Mitoma has also been ruled out for the next week, right? So
I think at least a high sort of weightage of doubt has been ascribed to it. So yeah.
Exactly. So it has definitely worked out better than anyone could have imagined, I think.
And another topic that we'd like to talk about, just in terms of the midfield to round things out, is also going to be another player in the wildcard draft. It is Salah. Now Salah is an interesting topic where I think we've seen some managers, even within our circles, who are actually planning to go out of Saka as soon as this week, right? And I suppose the question is, What are your thoughts on Salah? What are your plans for selling Salah? And what do you think is the most reasonable sort of path to take Salah out of your team for the time being?
Yeah, if you're talking about my team in particular, I think holding till AFCON is probably going to be my strategy. But I've seen people, for example, that don't own Holland who are going to do the move this week, as soon as this week, because again, it's a similar timing to when City played Arsenal, when people went out of Holland. This is exactly a similar situation where if you want to go out of Salah, might as well avoid the hardest fixture that he has. Because if you want to transfer him out, I mean, of course, it's team dependent. But all I'm saying is, if you want to, let's say, transfer him out in 14 or 15, you can easily bring that move 1 week early and do that in 13 and avoid his most difficult fixture. Again, I think as far as I can remember, every single time Salah seems to play well against City, but that's no reason to still not do the move because again, it's expected value. It's not great this week. If you look at his price, you might as well do it this week. But if you don't want to do it, and then if you want to do it in 14, I don't know what a sideways move or a holding move would be for that week. Do you have any strong opinions or maybe a strong option that you have, let's say between now 16 or game week 18?
Yeah, I mean, so I think so. I've seen mention of 16 just because I think if you think about covering captaincies,
Hmm.
arguably maybe you would like Salah for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then actually 16 plus it becomes more so the case that I think Holland takes over most of the captaincy. So if you sort of subscribe to that single captaincy logic, then I think that's a nice window. But personally, I actually really like 18, and that's 18 expecting that Darwin's minutes will just basically shoot up over that run, right? Because with Salah leaving for AFCON at around 2021, that sort of time, you'll have Darwin basically in a 3-4-3 structure, is the way I see it. And also on game weeks, I think 18 and 20. 18 is versus Arsenal, 20 is versus Newcastle. So you would be avoiding, technically those two bad fixtures for Salah. Even though if he plays 21, of course, that's not ideal, right? Because you're going to miss the Bournemouth fixture. But I do think 18 makes sense. It's the same logic really as transferring him out this week. It just so happens to allow you to have Fulham and Sheffield and even Crystal Palace, back to back, and then you avoid some of the tougher fixtures later on. So I do like 18, and that's specifically if you have the confidence with Darwin's minutes, moving into a 3-4-3, just anticipating during AFCON that you will be playing a 3-4-3. Other than that, yeah, I think as you said, holding till AFCON makes plenty of sense, particularly if you just want to maintain whatever 3-5-2 structure you have in place. But look, the reality is we're going to have a ridiculous budget later, and we are probably going to have to sell Salah eventually, and we're going to move into a 3-4-3 is my general opinion. So I'm actually eyeing 18 for now.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And just one thing, the reason we've picked out, let's say, next week or game week 13, game week 16 and 18 is because I've seen a lot of players who still have the wild card saying that they
Hmm.
seem to be getting more expected value out of wild card 16 compared to
Oh, okay.
wild card 19. And if that is going to be the case, then wildcard seems to be an appropriate time to restructure your team and shift from, let's say, 3-5-2 to 3-4-3 or whatever you want to accomplish. Even if you want to stick to 3-5-2 and basically like swap Salah for Holland essentially. And other than that, as you've said, the timing is completely dependent on what fixtures you want to keep him for and how you see captaincy panning out. And let's say you're one of those that still doesn't want to back Holland, then I don't see any reason why you want to remove him because he's still a pretty decent captaincy choice till the time he leaves for AFCON, except for a couple of games, and then you have to look for alternatives if you still don't want to own Holland because there are some players I've seen who want to keep their teams Holland free till 20 or
Yeah.
21. I think we can move on to the final topic. I recognize that this is going to be a light episode, especially because we live streamed last week and we got a lot of stuff done there in terms of our talking points from, let's say, the first 12 weeks. So, for captaincy, we have a couple of options, and it's Holland, Son, and I see that Fran has mentioned Bowen with an asterisk because of a potential injury. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's firmly on Holland. It's
Yeah,
once again
yeah,
that you can sort of side with the logic of the home fixture, and I think there's some element to saying that maybe review still actually has really good expectations to Spurs compared to, let's say, market. And part of me just thinks, yeah, why not just back Haaland when the EV is so close to Son anyways. And I'm a little bit, I would say, from a grassy point of view, against the idea that Son's such an elite captaincy option versus, once again, another top team, right, within Aston Villa. I think Aston Villa are still maybe top five, top six in expected goals conceded this
Yeah.
season. So, a comfortably strong team now, better on attack, of course, and yeah, ultimately, Holland is just sitting there. So I think I'll just take Holland this week.
So just out of interest, for anyone who wants to know the expected values, so Holland is right now at 62 minutes because of his injury flag.
Mm-hmm.
If I think we all expect him to start and play the whole game, and
Yeah,
if we, let's say,
sorry.
set his minutes to 88, he is the clear captaincy choice on expected value as well. Closely followed by Son, but as we've discussed, I think Holland is just a very clear captaincy choice for me this week. And then Eze is very far behind, but I'm just mentioning him because in terms of MD, he is right up there because as you just said, it's Luton. So that's the only factor, but I would still go for Holland in any case.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally agreeing with you there, and we just have to stay tuned with Holland's news. And since we all own Sun, well, we own Sun at least for now. It does feel easy to have the two best options possible at our disposal. So I think that's it for us this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys can do us a massive favor, please give this podcast 5-star ratings on whatever platform you're listening to, or if you're on YouTube, do feel free to comment and subscribe and even like the video.
Yeah, absolutely. See you guys next week. Bye.